Hello, hey y'all. Hey, happy marvelous Monday. How's everybody today? I hope that you are well. I'm super excited that you are joining me today. This is part three. We are talking about illegal and expensive mistakes that landlords make. I'm excited that you are joining me. Welcome to all of you who are joining by way of Facebook, by way of LinkedIn, as well as YouTube. I am Karissa Spann, the abundantly blessed landlord and tenant expert. I come on live Mondays at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, sharing information for landlords as well as tenants to positively improve the entire rental community. So I've touched on fair housing laws, prohibited practices over the past couple of weeks because April is National Fair Housing Month. And so I'm going to wrap up today. I'm also going to answer questions that some of you may have. So please feel free to ask your question, drop your comment, drop your question in the comment box. I will respond to them. If you are watching the replay, thank you so much. Before I get into the discussion, the conversation of today, let me just say that I am not an attorney. I am not giving legal advice. However, I am sharing the industry's tips and practices. So I do want to share that disclaimer because sometimes I get inquiries about legal matters. And again, I am not an attorney. But again, I'm so delighted that you are joining me today. So as we are wrapping up Fair Housing Month, I received some news about landlords who unknowingly violated fair housing laws and how it negatively impacted their business. One company in particular filed bankruptcy, and it's not looking good for them because they seemingly intentionally violated fair housing laws. And that's a big no-no, right? You cannot intentionally do things that break the law. And I know that sometimes, especially new investors, new property managers, new landlords in the industry may not be as knowledgeable about the laws. But one of the things that I commonly say is this: the laws don't really care about how you feel or what you know. As a housing professional, it is always in your best interest to find out what you are required to do. And you also may want to consider taking a fair housing class, because at the end of the day, like I said, what you don't know can and will hurt you. So please make sure that you are checking out resources in your community. And it doesn't matter if you're, I think that a lot of people will benefit from understanding the laws. Tenants will definitely benefit by understanding and knowing what their rights are as a tenant. So I wanted to share that today. And as I bring this discussion to a close, as we are wrapping up Fair Housing Month, I'm just going to share some prohibited practices. I'm just going to share some examples of what housing discrimination could potentially look like. And many of us, we understand that fair housing laws came into play in 1968, but it's not clear because we're starting to see a lot more cases filed against landlords, and they're in a range of thousands of dollars on up. One company, well, actually a couple of companies that I've already discussed on a previous live, it cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars because of mistakes that they made. And so whether the mistakes are intentional, unintentional, whether they knew, whether they didn't know, it was a costly mistake. And so my goal is to try to help prevent as many people as possible from having to experience this. So today I'm just going to touch on some examples of housing discrimination. All right, so here's the first one here. I do want people to understand that fair housing is, it's not just for your specific area. There are federal fair housing laws throughout the country. And of course, in each jurisdiction, there are going to be added protections. And so I know, for instance, in Washington, D.C., DC does have a lot of protected classes. There are a lot of things that landlords simply cannot do in Washington, D.C., because there are laws in place to protect the tenants. So I'm going to share some prohibited practices. And again, if you have questions, if there's something that you would like for me to touch on as I'm wrapping up this conversation today about fair housing laws, or if you're watching a replay, go ahead and drop your comment or your question in the chat box. I will respond to it. So here is an example of housing discrimination. All right, so you have Mike, who is an African-American man. He contacts a prospective landlord to say, hey, I am interested in leasing your rental property. So on the phone, he is eager to rent the place, and the landlord is eager to rent to him. But when the landlord meet him in person so that he could fill out the application, the landlord's attitude is entirely different. So the attitude of the landlord has changed. And so a few days later, the applicant, or the prospect rather, receives a letter saying that the applicant, he receives a letter saying that the application was denied due to a negative landlord reference. Well, as it turns out, he contacted his current landlord, and the current landlord said, hey, nobody has contacted me for a reference. And so he felt that he was discriminated against, and actually filed a case against that landlord. Now, here's what I want people to understand about this situation. Lawsuits, complaints can be filed not just against that specific landlord. Well, let me just say it like this. It doesn't have to be a current landlord. Prospects and applicants can sue individuals who they have never rented from if they feel like, and if they strongly believe that they have a case against someone who has violated their rights. And so in this situation, a complaint was filed with HUD, and HUD did investigate it. And it turns out that the applicant was right, because the landlord continued to show the rental property. And not only that, but that landlord does have a pattern of discriminating against people of color. And so that is a prohibited practice. But see, here's the thing. Discrimination is not always obvious. So I talked extremely deep, and I've repeated over the weeks about fair housing testers and what that looks like. So I'm going to touch on that in a little bit. But that's just the first example of fair housing laws that are, those practices are strongly prohibited. So here's another example. I'm going to touch on harassment. So here's a situation here. So Lisa, she has a housing choice voucher, which means that she's in the Housing Authority Section 8, formerly called Section 8 program. So Lisa, she fell behind on her rent for 1 month. Okay. And so when Lisa asked her landlord to give her a few more days, the landlord said yes, but only if Lisa would go out with him. So Lisa, she felt compelled to do it because she knew that she didn't have the rent money. So she said yes. And over the next few days, the landlord sent some extremely explicit text messages, sexually explicit text messages to Lisa. And she politely asked him to stop. So she tells her landlord that she doesn't want to go out. And he follows up to tell Lisa that if she does not go out with him, that she was going to be evicted, and that would cause her to lose her housing voucher. So Lisa, she files a complaint with HUD because sexual harassment is a form of sex discrimination. And we're still talking about housing discrimination. This actually happens more often than people know or understand. This is a prohibited practice. And I know that for many, it just seems like, well, Karissa, that's just kind of like common sense, right? Well, common sense is just not so common for everybody. And I do know several individuals personally who have gone through this, and they reached out to me to let me know that their landlord positioned them for sexual advances or sexual favors. And when they didn't do it, they were faced with a notice to go to court or threatened to be evicted. That's housing discrimination. That's sexual discrimination. That is definitely a prohibited practice. Okay, so let me touch on disability. Let me give you an example because I can talk about it, but I think that sometimes given true stories of what happened and true cases that have been filed against landlords, I think that paints a better picture. And again, if you have any questions, any comments, remarks, or observations, please go ahead and put it in the comment section. So let me touch on disability for a moment because we know that disability is a protected federal class. But here is what an example could look like. And this is a true story. This has definitely got a lot of attention because of this situation. So here it is. Cynthia, she has a documented disability. It affects her capacity to manage her own finances and things that it's going on in her home. So she tells her building manager that her aunt will be paying her rent for this reason and ask if all notices relating to her rent can be sent to the relative. So the manager tells her that it is the policy of that property management company to only send notices to the resident with no exceptions at all. And several months later, the tenant receives an eviction notice because her relative, had she known, would have assisted with paying the rent. Not only that, but the rent had increased. So the tenant filed a complaint with HUD because she was denied reasonable accommodation. Understand that any tenant who is renting your property, if they have a disability and they are asking for reasonable accommodation, please take the matter seriously. Sometimes it may in fact be your policy, right? That you only deliver notices to tenants with no exceptions. But if you have a tenant that has a disability and it is documented and they're telling you, hey, listen, I need a relative, I need a living aid, I need a power of attorney to assist me, that's called a reasonable accommodation. The law requires housing providers to adjust your policy to accommodate tenants and individuals who have a disability. And so in this situation, it turned out really bad because not only did they not accommodate this tenant, but they filed an eviction notice, they increased the rent, and the tenant just did not have the capacity to pay the rent, to pay the bills, and to manage the day-to-day things in their life. This went really bad, really fast, and a lot of people are starting to realize, as it pertains to tenants, a lot of people are starting to realize and understand their rights. Please adjust your policy. I know that some people will say, well, that's our policy, we can't change it. And for some of you, maybe you work for a property management company and maybe it has to go to corporate level. And I do hope that people in executive management and ownership will understand that fair housing laws require you to change your policy to accommodate individuals with disabilities. So please make sure that you discuss these type of matters with ownership, with executive management team, with attorneys who can help you make sure that you are in compliance. Because here's the thing, this tenant sued not just the property manager, but sued the company. And so I don't want people to think that when complaints are filed that it only goes to the owner. Well, no, it can go up the chain, right? So they can file a complaint with anybody who discriminated against them. And so it is always in your best interest, for those of you who have property management companies, make sure that your staff understand prohibited practices. Make sure that your staff understand fair housing laws, what you can and cannot do. because sometimes it's those small mistakes that can cost you thousands of dollars. Okay. All right. So let me share another example of housing discrimination. So I talked about this one young lady who she's married to a female, same sex marriage, right? So she called the landlord. She said, hey, listen, I saw your property advertised. I'm really interested in it. The landlord said, okay, hey, great. Thank you so much for calling. We love to schedule a tour for you to come out and take a look at the rental property. So on the day of the scheduled appointment, the prospect gets out the car. She meets the landlord at the door and she tells the landlord, hey, let me go and get my significant other. I'll be right back. So she went to the car and she got her wife. So her and the wife came back, and then all of a sudden, the landlord conveniently remembered, oh, I apologize. I just remembered that we accepted an application. We have an approved application for this rental property. And that could be definitely a form of housing discrimination. Please know and understand, tenants, that you do have rights. Now, HUD has definitely set the bar for tenants to file a complaint. They can call, they could send an email, they can fax a complaint. There are local organizations in almost every jurisdiction that handles and receive fair housing or housing discrimination complaints. It's not just HUD, right? And so I shared over the weeks throughout April that fair housing testers, people who are working in those type of positions, have started to increase. I also shared how we're going to see more and more landlord targeted lawsuits filed by tenants, because tenants do understand that they do have rights. So this is why I share information the way that I do each and every Monday. I'm live right here, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm live on Facebook. I'm live on YouTube. I'm live on LinkedIn. I want you to understand, as a landlord, that even if you don't know the law, like I said, the laws don't really care about what you know. It is an expectation that because you are operating a rental property business, and it doesn't matter if it's your first time starting out or if you've been in the industry for a while, the laws are in place to protect tenants. Now, let me just also put this plug in it, because if you are adhering to the law, then those same laws that protect tenants can also protect you as a housing provider. But you must know what you can and cannot do. And sometimes, like I said, it's those small mistakes that can cost a lot of money. All right. So please adhere to some of the information that I've shared, some of the examples that I shared, and I can go on and on for days, but I just wanted to give just some examples of prohibited practice. Last week, I touched on steering and what that looked like. So for instance, let's say you have an applicant who comes in, and the applicant has a lot of kids, right? True story, I shared this with my class of students. I shared how many, many years ago, I was conducting an open house, and my team and we were there. We were showing a beautiful home in, I believe it was 16th Street Heights in Washington, D.C. It was a almost 4.5 bedroom home. The owner spared no cost. The owner spared no expense. They went all out. She put a lot of money into this rental property. So during this open house, it was conducted on a Saturday. So on Saturday, there were a lot of people who came through. There were a lot of kids who came through. This one family in particular, they came through. They were ready to submit an application. Maybe it's our fault. Who knows? You can blame us. That's fine. But we provided refreshments, which consisted of chocolate chip cookies and chips and drinks and all that stuff. So some of the kids had some chocolate chip cookies. They had chocolate all over their hands, right? So they're running through the house. They're just touching the walls and they're super excited. They're touching everything. So when my staff realized that there were chocolate handprints, like handprints with literal chocolate, like dabs of chocolate on the wall, they were a little perturbed. They were upset. They were frustrated. They were angry because the mother did not address the behavior. And so the kids, they are running all around. Like there are other people, touring the rental property. And so my staff got really, really upset, and initially wanted to automatically not accept that young lady's application because of the behavior of her kids. And so I did have to explain to them that they have to accept all applications that comes through, even if the children's behavior is not the best. This is one of the reasons why when I'm coaching landlords, I tell them, listen, yes, you can observe the behavior, but you cannot automatically deny the application based solely off of the behavior or the action or how the child or the children look. Now, I know that people will do whatever they desire, right? But just because you have a desire to deny an application based off of behavior of the kids doesn't mean that it's right. Now, when I am providing training for tenants, I tell them to please monitor the behavior of your kids, because people may not tell you as an applicant, as a prospect. Many people are not going to say, oh, well, I've denied your application because your kids were rowdy. They were off the hook. They just did whatever they wanted and you had no control over them. Listen, people are not going to be that honest, right? I'm going to be honest, and I'm telling tenants when I conduct my training to watch the behavior, because it would definitely be illegal for someone to deny that application based solely off of the behavior of the children. And so housing discrimination can come in multiple forms. And like I said, it's not always obvious. But know that there is a right and a wrong way to handle your rental property business. There's a right and a wrong way to manage your affairs as a tenant, right? But ultimately, it's not what we know. It's what we can prove. And just because an individual may seemingly be discriminating against you if you're a tenant, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. Can you prove that discrimination is actually happening? And this is where the fair housing testers come into play. Fair housing testers are increasing. Multiple agencies around the United States have begun to increase fair housing testers. They're going out, they're testing landlords to make sure that they are not violating the law, right? I know one young lady in particular, she heard me talking about fair housing testers. She said, Dr. Spann, I just want a job as a fair housing tester because I'm going to sue any landlord who discriminate. Now that I know what a landlord can and cannot do, I'm going to go out and I'm going to test landlords. And so people are actually looking to test landlords to see how they're handling their rental property business. So please, ma'am, please, sir, as a housing professional, as a housing provider, know what you can and cannot do. So I'm going to pause for a little bit because I see some of my students have come in the room, and I do want to acknowledge you. Hey, thank you so much for tuning in on the YouTube channel. Here's your question. Does that include making modifications to your house to accommodate a disability tenant? Thank you so much for that question. Now, here is the thing. Reasonable modifications may be required, but if it is going to impose a financial burden, you could allow the tenant to pay out of pocket to make that modification. You want to make sure that it's in writing under the condition that when they move out of the rental property, that they return it back to its original condition. Great question. So I would say, look at whatever your policy is. If it's a minor modification, let me use this example. Hey, Juice, thank you so much for tuning in, Joe. So let me come back to you here, and I'm going to use this example. So let's say you have a tenant who is disabled. They're asking you for permission to install a grab bar. Okay. You say, well, yes, I'll install the grab bar because I'm a good housing provider and I want to make sure that you have what you need and be comfortable in your rental home, because it is the place that these tenants call home, right? So it's not just a regular grab bar. This tenant is specifically asking for a grab bar with what is it, Swarovski crystals and Bluetooth, and of course that's hundreds of dollars versus a regular grab bar that might be around the range of, let's say, 20, 30, 40, 50 bucks, right? And so you're giving you're giving that tenant permission to install a grab bar, but if it's going to be a financial burden, you can allow the tenant to pay out of pocket for that modification. And sometimes, especially if they are coming through some sort of agency, there are local dollars, there are federal dollars, there are programs in place that could potentially help tenants pay for some of these expenses so that they are not financially burdened as well. And so that is a great question. Thank you so much for that. Hey, Joe, do you have any questions? We're talking about illegal and expensive mistakes that landlords make. And thank you so much for tuning in. I see you on Facebook. I see you on LinkedIn as well as YouTube. And so I shared examples today because I really want people to understand real-time situations that happen, real scenarios that have been taken to court, complaints that have actually been filed with HUD. And if you have questions, please look up fair housing laws. Please take a fair housing class. And it doesn't matter if you're a landlord or if you are a tenant. There are a lot of free resources in the rental community. But by all means, if you have questions, please email me and I will definitely point you in the right direction. And again, I am not an attorney, but I do share information. So thank you so much for tuning in. I do ask that every week, show up every Monday. I'm live right here, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on YouTube. Every Monday, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But let me share my email address with you. In the event you want to email me, I want you to know how to reach me. So here's my email address at the bottom of the screen here. That's where you can find me, info@landlordlife.com, info@landlordlife.com. I just wanted to touch on fair housing because April is National Fair Housing Month. I shared some examples of housing discrimination. Now, one of the things that I did not touch on, and I can touch on LGBTQ discrimination because that's a big thing now. And there are lots of protections for a lot of people. So there are definitely resources available on housing discrimination for a lot of people. So please know and understand what that looks like. And so for those of you who don't know what LGBTQ is, that's for lesbians, gays, bisexuals, transgender, and or queer or questioning. Fair housing laws prevent landlords from discriminating to individuals in that class as well. And so let's say, for instance, you have someone who comes to you with the appearance of a female, but when you look at their ID, the ID is a male gender name, right? You cannot discriminate against someone because their sexual orientation or their gender identity. So like I said, please know what you can and cannot do, because at the end of the day, what you don't know, it can and it will hurt you and it can cost you a lot of money. So I hope that this information was helpful today. Again, if you have questions, comments, remarks, or observations, please email me. I will definitely follow up with you. I thank you for joining me today. My time is up and I thank you for yours. I hope that you'll join me next Monday. If you found this information helpful today, please share it with someone else. Share it with other landlords, share it with other tenants. I Again, I welcome you to join me each week. And if you have not already subscribed to my YouTube channel, find me on YouTube, Landlord Life with Karissa Spann. That's where you can find me at. You can find my replays there. In May, I'm going to touch on some serious conversations and subject matters for landlords as well as tenants. And so I hope that you'll join me. And again, share, like, tag, share it with someone else. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you. All right, everybody. I look forward to seeing you all next Monday. Have a phenomenal week. Thank you again for joining me. I'm going to say bye for now.